If you're new here, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and for the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. Today, I have Kevin and Allison, my friends, back again for a second episode. Today, we're going to talk about community. And community is important in all of our lives, but I think it's especially important when you're dealing with a disability. So thank you again for being here, Kevin and Allison.
Thank you.
Why do you think having a strong community is important for people dealing with a disability, especially when you have a child with a disability?
For me, I think there is a sense of almost camaraderie, like that you're not alone. That there's somebody else, and not that you want them to struggle, but that there's somebody else who's going through what you're going through, who has been there, and you can offer support, or like can just be somebody you can talk to and they kind of understand, like, I mean, both the struggles and the like good things, right? Like the things that you get to be excited about. So I think it's good to just have somebody who kind of knows what you're dealing with, I guess.
Sometimes families that aren't familiar with disability or haven't thought about it will, when we tell them one of our experiences, they'll sort of deny it. So Jameson can walk, but he is very socially unaware. So we actually have an accessible placard so that we can park in the accessible parking spots, just so that he's less likely to get run over in parking lots. And we have had all sorts of problems over the years, especially at his previous school, with parents parking in or just behind the accessible spots for their convenience. And when we had expressed frustrations, they would often be like, oh, it's just for a minute. It's right. And so for them, their experience of it is just for a minute. But for us, it was every day for months on end, which would sometimes result in us having to not park in the accessible spots, but be able to park there and have to park across the street. And there was one time that trying to get multiple kids across the street into the van, that Jameson almost got hit because somebody else wasn't paying attention. He wasn't paying attention, right? Again, he's socially unaware and had stepped away from the van.
Well, I think I was putting a child in a car seat, and he was supposed to be holding on to the car, like just, that was my thing. You just touch the car while mom's getting, one child in. And he just kind of drifted away. And it was a snowy day, and it was just frightening. So it was just, after that, and people are just like, well, he can walk, he can do this. And you've had this when you've gone to like Walmart or whatever, those carts that are supposed to be for people with disabilities, like Jameson would be in one, and somebody would come up and say, like, don't you know that that's supposed to be for, people with disabilities? And because Jameson looks very typical for the most part, that they just assume that we're doing things, or that he shouldn't have things that he
he's over 5 feet tall, 120 pounds. I can't pick him up and put him in like where the little kids go. And so Meijer, where we do our grocery shopping, has the Caroline's carts that have sort of a spot built in for larger folks. And I've had numerous times somebody come up and tell me that Jameson's not supposed to be in one of those carts. And I'm like, yes, he is. Right. And so there's just, for folks that don't live the kind of family dynamic that we live, they just don't understand what it's like. And so even if there's another family that has a kid with Down syndrome or spina bifida, or something else, just they're more likely to understand that these things actually really do build up, that they are big problems, that, as difficult as it is navigating public school, and does your kid get the teacher that they want, right? Figuring out whether or not the school is actually allowing them to go on field trips, for instance, and what it takes in order to make that happen is just a whole nother order of magnitude. And so even if another family, another part of the community can't understand exactly what you're going through, for somebody to understand why it's a big deal and why it's hard, there's at least a value of knowing that what you're navigating is recognized, that it's seen, and that it is often seen to be a problem with the larger community. And that, I don't know that it makes it easier to do, but at least you're not doing it on your own. Yeah.
Right. It sounds like there's a sense of peace and calm in just having that community who understands, but also not having to constantly explain yourselves.
Yep.
Can you share a story about a time when your community made a real difference in your lives?
So it's kind of community in a sense that Alicia from in Idaho, she like owned her own like
therapy
company. And there were times, so we were applying for something called Katie Beckett, which it's Idaho related. It's Medicaid. And we were applying for that, and I had applied a couple different times. Did you just spill?
I just did.
Sorry.
I've got problems.
So we had applied for Katie Beckett and we'd been denied. And I'm like, I don't know how to apply for this. And she's like, oh, well, you have to apply for Social Security first and be denied before you can go apply for Katie Beckett. But I had no idea. Like, I would have just kept applying for Katie Beckett over and over. But until we get denied by Social Security, we couldn't even apply for Katie Beckett, or they were always going to deny us. But there's nowhere, anywhere that this is told to you. So again, it's something you don't know, that you didn't know. And somebody was able to come alongside us and be like, oh, let me help you fill out this paperwork. You're going to get this denial, all this stuff. So it was something that was helpful, where like somebody in our community was able to help us through getting that. So do you have any?
So I tell this story in one of my books. When we were in Idaho, there was a family that we were very close with. Sarah and Stephen are the parents. They had 4 children. We would often have like a bunch of folks for trick or treat. We'd all gather at one house. We'd have like a chili or a soup dinner, and then like all of our kids knew each other from school and church and various kinds of stuff.
And our neighborhood was fairly enclosed, and small enough that you could walk it. And
so we just get a big group to have dinner and then go trick or treat. And we were doing this one year, and Jameson, again, was, he could walk. But when we left, within like 2 hours, right, he's slow, he doesn't have the same stamina. He often wanted to look in people's houses more than he was interested in the candy. So he would kind of look, and when it was time to leave, he would sometimes cry leaving that house because he wasn't done looking. So within like 3 houses, most of the kids are 8 houses down already, including our other 2. And I remember Stephen looking back, and he saw Jameson. And again, this is one of those places that Allison and I kind of had to split up so that our girls weren't running off down the road by themselves. And he saw that Jameson and I were just behind. And he picked up one of their kids, put their kid on his shoulder, and he came back. And we only got to like 15 houses in the hour and a half, right? And he missed out seeing his kids at all the other houses. The kid that was with us missed out on some of the candy. I got this far without tearing up. I tear up every time I tell the story. But us not walking by ourselves meant more to them than the candy, than being able to run with everybody else. And for me, that was just an instance of, you and your experience matter more than these other things. And because the whole dynamic was a certain way, we're going to stay back so that you're not just walking by yourself. And that meant the world to me. And it still does. When I think of this family, this thought always comes to mind, that we mattered to them in order for them to just, And for them, like, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? It was like, I don't know, an extra gallon of candy or whatever. It was not being with the big group, but it meant so much to us that this was not just us doing it on our own.
Wow, that's beautiful. The sacrifices that your friends make, something that they didn't have to do.
Yep.
Well, what does your support network look like? Family, friends, colleagues, other communities?
This is complicated. We lived in 3 different states. Jameson was born in California. We've said we lived in Idaho. We currently live in Michigan. We left Idaho when he was 18 months.
No, California.
We left California, sorry, when he was 18 months. So that was just a very different experience. In Idaho, where the story that I just told about trick-or-treating, we were part of sort of a group of a bunch of transplants. So we felt like we had lots of folks, people that I worked with, people in the neighborhood, people whose kids went to school with our kids, people that went to our church. We didn't have any family in town, but we always had folks that we could turn to, right? Can you watch our one kid while we take Jameson to a doctor's appointment or something like that? We've now been in Michigan for 9 years, and we have nothing like this here. And it's not that the people, that our neighbors don't care, or that my colleagues at work or something, but our life is just really complicated. I think in the 9 years we've been here, we've left our kids with babysitters twice.
Yeah.
And one of those didn't end up super well. We had to end up sort of leaving very quickly wherever we were at to come back here. Our families are all out of state. My parents used to come up sometimes so that Allison could travel with me for work when I was going to Austria or someplace fun. But as they've gotten older, it's harder for them to do that. As our kids have gotten older, it's hard for them to navigate some of the demands on our kids. So we have no local family. We have friends, but not anybody that we can lean into in the kind of way that we used to be able to.
So he was talking about how Idaho was a lot of transplants. Like nobody was from there. Everybody was from somewhere else. So I think a lot of people were going through the same thing, where everybody where we are now is from here. They may have gone away I swear, everybody lived in Chicago for like 3 years and then moved back. So everybody is from here. They're related to everybody from here, or they went to school with everybody from here. So there's not a lot of transplants. And so a lot of these people have been friends for 30 years, and breaking into a friend group of people who've been friends for super long is difficult. And we haven't, like, where we had kind of a community of people that were, parents of disabled kids in Idaho, we don't have that same community here. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the community that people have is based on where they're living. So if you're in a town that you've lived in your whole life, people know you, I think it's going to be a little bit easier. Or if you have family around, I think it is harder to be those new people in town with new kids and with a disabled child. And I think it is a lot harder for people to accept you or want to get to know you, because I think it's hard. So and our life is hard.
And just even doing things with people that might be our friends is a lot more complicated. We've got a 17-year-old that we can't leave by himself.
Right.
We don't have a babysitter that understands him to know what to do. He's qualified for community living support, CLS, for the last 5 years, but we've never been able to actually find somebody that is willing to do the work at what the state is willing to pay. And so even if some friends are like, oh, we're going out to dinner, it's hard for us. Do we leave Jameson with his sisters? And as they've gotten older, we can do that some more now. But even just the kinds of day-to-day things that you do with your friends, or, they're all taking their kids to go canoeing or something like that. Is this the kind of thing that we can do with Jameson? Is it going to be a bad experience for him? So it's been, the older that he's gotten, the more the the developmental gaps between him and other kids his own age have increased. You know, when you've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old playing with your neighbors who have a 3-year-old, I mean, that's one thing. But when our cognitively disabled autistic 17-year-old is right, like sort of in a context with his peers who are driving, going to movies on their, like, there's just no connection.
Yeah.
And so he is very socially isolated, and because of the ways that who he is and his complexities affect our social lives, we're very socially isolated.
Well, and I feel like our advocacy for our son has also maybe made it difficult to make friends or be friends with people because they don't understand that advocacy part, and we look like we're complaining or mean or just like we're these people who are always pushing, you know, all of this different stuff. And I think people either don't understand it, or that's just unattractive to them, like to make friends with, where we had a lot of people doing the same things where we were before. And again, Jameson was younger, and he just had more of a community of other either disabled children or non-disabled children that he got along with. So it has, moving to Michigan has been difficult for a lot of those reasons.
So since your community of support was so strong in Idaho, did you find that a big surprise moving to Michigan, how hard it was to build your community of support?
Definitely. I think Idaho kind of gets like a bad rap of like, oh, there's nobody who lives there. You know, like when we tell people we're from Idaho, they're like, oh, where did you live there? Like, I think it's almost like, oh, there's nobody there, you know, or that it was, I don't know, it was a very different thing from like coming to Michigan. You know, it's a bigger city. We live in the second biggest city in the state. And I think coming here, I thought we would have more supports, more, basically more supports in different ways than we did. And then it was definitely not what I thought it would be. I mean, it's been harder to get therapies, and like he was talking the CLS. So it's just been harder to get a lot of the things here than I thought it would be coming from Idaho.
As a bigger state with a higher population, navigating Michigan's social support services has been a lot more complicated than it was in Idaho. There was sort of one system that we had to navigate there, and it took us over a year to figure out even which of a number of different programs that we were supposed to be trying to get Jameson into. And so figuring out what that looks like has been trickier. And it's also been, I don't think this is unique to Michigan. I think that there's a Canadian version of this. I think that there's a Wisconsin version of this, but we have what we call here West Michigan nice. There's just sort of like, you're supposed to be pleasant and friendly, but and so when we complain about the way in which, you know, a Christian school has just been fundamentally horrible for our son, that people just weren't willing to care. And these are the schools that these people grew up in themselves and their kids now go to, right? We're seen as sort of the outliers, the complainers. And so because so much of our life has been sort of like trying to make space, then when you're in a space that people don't see that there's need to do that, it just makes it hard to have, you know, like, I'm sure that there's people that don't want to be around me because I'm the kind of person that's, you know, like if Jameson's being excluded by a school, I'm going to be like, you got a problem over here, right? Like this should not be it. I should not have to take off work in order for Jameson to go on a school field trip because you don't know how to take him on a trip to East Lansing with the rest of his school class. And so I can either just swallow all that, or I can try to make the community better at social cost.
Yeah, and people are friendly and they're like, oh yeah, we agree, but they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is, or like it's all very superficial in a way. And it's not, oh, tell me more about that. How can I help you? It's, oh, that sucks for you. And I guess we're not friends now.
And it's awkward, so we're going to go talk to the people that it's easier for us to get along with.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of openness to, let's, we have a problem, let's change the community. It's like, oh, we have a problem, I'm sorry to hear about that, see you later. So
I grew up in the upper Midwest, and that sounds very similar to what I grew up with. Everybody just kind of keeps to themselves. Nobody wants to get involved in all of those issues. So it sounds like really it depends on where you are at in the country, the different parts of the country, what kind of support you're able to build for yourself as far as community.
Yeah.
And there's probably a version of this that happens everywhere in the country, right? But it also depends on who the people are that you most often interact with. Again, so many folks here grew up here. They went to the same school district that our kids used to go to, right? That their kids go to that. And so calling into question what they're familiar with feels like an attack, maybe, or at least not their experience. And so I know that we feel very socially isolated, even from our friends, because we don't have the same time, energy, and background that many of them do.
Yeah, even take away not having a disabled child. If that were the case, I still think it would have been hard to be here. So that just adds another complexity.
I don't know if this is even something that you can answer, but are there any organizations or groups or resources that you have found helpful in building your community, or has that just maybe when you lived in Idaho, maybe something like that you can share with people?
There weren't really there, and maybe there are groups here, but like I would try to join some like neighborhood play groups when the kids were younger, and it was not fun. Like I went to a few of them, and I was like, this is not, again, most of the parents already knew each other, so it was really hard to break into those groups. Again, Idaho was much easier. I think we had belonged to a church where a lot of the other parents belonged that had kids with disabilities, and so like even the church was looking into doing some things like for Sunday schools and stuff like that for kids with disabilities, like having, therapists or people in it there that were going to be with the kids. And so it was really nice that I felt like they were always working towards something better. And we've not found that at the church here. Like people are very friendly, but there's no like, hey, how can we help your child with disabilities like participate in church? None of that. And there's online groups, but I don't feel personally attached or attracted to those things. They're not things that, I don't know, work for me. I'm more of a tangible, like in-person kind of person. So I don't do well with that kind of thing. So I don't know.
Especially since we do a fair bit of advocacy work, when we do connect with a group, it's often, hey, can you give a presentation to our group about how you make IEP meetings better? And again, I'm happy to do that. Or when our current church says, things like, what can we do to make it better? Then I feel like because of some of my background, I'm always the one, or we're always the ones having to do a lot of the work. We're so much of the strategizers, the givers rather than the receivers, and so it's just, I don't know, it's just hard.
And oftentimes we're like, is the outcome worth the work we're putting into it? Because I feel like sometimes we've done the work, we put the work in, and it's sort of like, oh, it didn't like manifest in the way I thought that it would be as helpful as I thought it would be.
What's a lesson that you've learned about having a community and support that you wish you had known earlier? Maybe something that is there anything that you think you may have done differently in moving to Michigan? Would you have moved to Michigan?
I mean, I wish we would have known how fragile it was. I mean, we moved to Michigan for to be back closer to family, for a better job, and so my guess is we probably still would have done it, but it would have been a lot different of an experience. We might have started things off the first couple years with an eye towards having to do it explicitly rather than anticipating it kind of developing organically.
And I think a lot of the people we talked to, probably mostly colleagues of yours, were actually from here. So I don't think that they had like the same experience. So they didn't know what it was like to be an outsider because they were never outsiders. So like, I don't think we talked to a lot of people that were like, you know, oh, by the way, it's going to be hard moving here. I think once we moved here, there were people who are like, oh yeah, it's hard to move into this community. But I don't think beforehand, like I'm just thinking of your colleagues, like the two people that I remember talking to, they were from here. So like there was like zero, like they had no idea that moving here and being an outsider would be hard. They were never outsiders. So I think they didn't have any advice for us in that sense, because they just don't. I think the people that are from here, they don't see it. They don't understand that there's that. Like they just think they're as friendly to everybody, and they're not. So I think we still would have moved here just based on our families being closer and, you know, the better job and stuff. It would have just, I think coming in thinking that maybe it's going to be a little more work than we originally thought would have been good, because it did end up being a lot more work than we thought it would be.
So for a family that is considering a move, maybe it's something that they have to do, what kind of advice would you give to them if they're dealing with a disability and they know that they need to build a community of support where they're going? What would you tell them?
I mean, there are local parent groups, you know, where Jameson does OT, they run some things. So I think that we didn't think we would need those sorts of things. We thought it would just sort of develop organically. And so maybe leaning more into what was already there. And then if we realized we didn't need it, leaning back out rather than waiting to lean into it might be something we would do different. But
yeah,
but again, like I don't even know that the times when we have gotten involved with some of those groups that a whole lot has developed from them.
Yeah. And things were much easier when the kids were younger. I feel like that even with Jameson at the school that he was at that eventually expelled him, it was easier when he was younger in the elementary school. I think the kids are more accepting. He was easier, or different hards, I guess. I don't know where I was going with that, but basically it was just easier when we first got here, and that has gotten harder since we've been here. And I think advocating for an adult with disabilities or an older child with disabilities is so much more difficult than a younger child too. So
when he was, say, 7, you know, people might not have really known how to interact with a disabled 7-year-old, but many of them understood what it was like to interact with young children. And so given his intellectual disability, right, there was just a way in which they were willing to be patient. I don't even know if it's quite the right way to make space for him when he was 7.
The children as well, like in his class, he had a lot more.
He had friends.
He had girls that like just would fawn over him and were very motherly. You know, in 4th grade, like he had this group of girls that wanted to push him on the swings, wanted to do this, and even some boys that like wanted to interact with him. But as they went into middle school and like, you know, cliques and friend groups are like created, and being different was really obvious, or that was considered bad, I guess. I think being friends with him then was no longer something that kids wanted to do.
So when he was in 4th, 5th grade, he would get invited to other kids' birthday parties, because a lot of 4th and 5th graders rent out, you know, a trampoline park, Sky Zone or something like that. And Jameson couldn't do the same sorts of things there as other folks. And one of us would always need to be there. But that the gap there was smaller. And now he's 17, right? And his peers want to, right, like drive and go out to dinner on their own and then go watch a movie or go walk around the mall. And none of that is stuff that he can do or has an interest in doing. And so the gap has just grown. And so it has become very clear to us over the years that elementary kids and their families had a lot more tolerance and willingness to work with us than now that he's in high school.
Well, while you're trying to build your community of support, because I assume that you're still trying to do that, as you're navigating this in a community that is hard to become a part of, because it sounds like there aren't a lot of people that move in from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, what are some things that you would like the locals to know? How could they be more inviting and more inclusive as a community?
So I think some of it just goes with an awareness of all these things that we've been talking about, right? There are lots of times when maybe we got invited to something. I remember my first year here, we were in, all the new incoming faculty were invited to a dean's house for dinner. And I was just like, no offense, but we're not coming, because bringing all of our kids into a house that is not built for kids, especially like what I would be doing the entire time is making sure Jameson didn't get into anything or break anything or had a good experience. And so we were invited but declined. And there are lots of reasons over the years we've had to decline things, right? What they're doing wouldn't be good for him. It conflicts with a therapy appointment, you know, all kinds of stuff. And then the invites just stopped coming. And so part of it is to make sure you're inviting, even if they still can't continue to do it. Mm-hmm. But maybe even more helpful for that is to figure out why what you're inviting somebody to isn't a good fit, and make space. It would be weird for us to go, you know, as I mentioned, like sometimes going into a colleague's house to eat dinner with coworkers and their families and whatnot. But even something as simple as like, it's going to be on the back porch or outside, right? So Jameson makes a mess when he eats because he's got bad motor control or something like that. Then that's easier, just because the environment is set up in a way that's going to mitigate some of the things that we're trying to prevent.
And I feel like there is a bit of kind of, and I don't want to say fear of Jameson, but fear of the unknown of what Jameson is or who he is. And so, you know, people will come in and say hi to him, and he doesn't regularly say hi back, or it takes him a second to say hi or bye back. But like, I think people are like, well, I tried by saying hi, and then they don't try to interact anymore. And the thing is, Jameson loves it when people come over. Like, he loves like people to be here. Even if he's not interacting, like sometimes he'll be like, will you sit next to me? And he does not want you to play with him. And if you take his Play-Doh, he will let you know how much he does not want you to play with him. He wants you to play alongside of him, or just be there, like kind of be a presence. And I think people, they don't understand. And so it's not just that they don't understand. Sometimes I think it's that they don't understand, and either they're not willing to learn, or just don't know how, and they don't ask because that's impolite, and I don't know. So I feel like there's a little bit of fear of the unknown there.
There's a kind of awkwardness that people don't know what to do with. I mean, I remember feeling some of this from the other side of the table when I'd go over to your and Lance's house in Idaho. Like, I don't know the best way to, you know, interact. I don't want to intrude on your life. There's so much about sort of our experiences back then from the other side that I think about. But because people don't like that feeling, they just sort of
avoid it.
And the way to avoid feeling that with our family is to avoid us. And even though people don't mean to do that, that's what it becomes.
Well, since you brought up Lance and coming over to our house and interacting with him, what are some things that in hindsight, you think I could have done differently to make it easier for you to come into our home and spend time with Lance?
I actually don't know that there's much that you could have done. I just wish that I had understood then what I understand now. So for instance, I would have asked a lot more questions. I remember we were over there one time and you were getting ready to feed him. And I just was just like, oh, can I get him this? And you're like, no, he can't have that. I was like, oh, okay, right. So there's just a way in which I didn't know. And I was, again, trying to help out, but I didn't know that I should ask you what was best to do it. So I would just ask a lot more questions. Are you comfortable with me wheeling Lance out onto the back porch and sitting out in the flowers? Is there something I can do to help you get his lunch ready? Or should I just sit here and talk with him about fishing story, right? So again, I don't know that you could have done anything different. You were navigating a lot, and to say that you needed to do something different is, again, to put the onus on the person that's already in that.
Yeah.
And so I just wish that I would have known our analogs of what was hard, so that I was more likely to understand what your analog was, and so that I would know better how to take some of that onus on me rather than.
And to kind of push through the awkward, like to push through the uncomfortable feelings that we might have been experiencing, instead of like making you feel uncomfortable, right? Like, or like that you had to make us feel comfortable in that situation. Because I still feel like sometimes we do that when Jameson, like when people come over, I'm like, okay, Jameson, you say hi, or I have to tell them, oh, he needs this or that, and nobody's asking. I'm just telling them. And again, putting more work on me than on like the person who's here trying to talk or whatever. So
I remember one time being over at your house and Lance was telling me a very particular fishing story. And this was probably like the third or fourth time I had heard that fishing story. And I remember you sort of like apologizing, like, sorry, but he loves this. And I just remember, like, if that's what Lance wants to tell me, like, then I'll gladly hear the story, right? Because that's how he was connecting. And so that was a place where you told, right? Like, you felt awkward. I was just like, no, like, I'm fine. And then I came over even after that, and I'm sure I heard the same fishing story again, but we just knew how to take Lance telling the fishing story.
I'm thinking back to that time and the conversation that we're having now, and just realizing how awkward it is, how uncomfortable we feel asking people questions. How can we make it more of the norm to have conversations about these things? Because it's a normal part of your life. It might not be a normal part of everybody else's life, but how is anybody going to learn anything unless there is communication and conversation about it?
Yeah. And one of the tricky parts here is that even sometimes when people want to ask these things, they because Jameson's almost always around, right? And like, we don't try to hide anything, but there's just ways that social interactions go that reinforce this assumption that, like, there's something wrong with him, or he's the problem, or they could talk about things in ways that are going to encourage certain kind of stigma. And so since he's often around, there are sometimes conversations that we don't want to have with him there, because even if he seems that he's completely tuned out, he's tracking all this sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And because he doesn't interact in the same way that other folks do, I think there's a lot of people that think that, like, oh, he's not paying attention. And so sometimes it's like, I would love to have a conversation about that. Let me get something here. We can go, take a 10-minute walk around the neighborhood. I'm happy to answer that, but I don't want to answer in a way that's going to be right in front of, because disabled folks already in so much of their lives don't have privacy, right? In order to get any kind of service, tell us your medical history, right? In the first 3 minutes, the way in which there's what sometimes gets called access intimacy. You have to admit parts of your lives in order to even get space in something. Mm-hmm. And that's tricky to do, right? We wouldn't expect our daughters' personal lives to have to be shared in order for them to get invited to a birthday party or something like that. And so part of it is, I would love to hear more about this. Tell me when would be a good time and what's the right context. And then for the other person to sort of listen, rather than like, oh, that's not what I expected, never mind.
And I think sometimes people worry about being offensive or being insensitive or offensive about things. And so they don't ask questions. Or then sometimes when they do, they are actually offensive, kind of like they've asked things that is none of their business. And so I think there's that kind of a balance between people trying not to be offensive or make you feel awkward and actually being those things. So I do realize there is a balance for people, but I would much rather somebody ask and me be able to say, that might not be appropriate, or like maybe let's talk about it somewhere else or something like that, than not ask. But I understand that there is a balance, that some people are trying to not be offensive, and then some people just don't care. And
so much is contextual. Like, you're our friend in this context of trying to help people learn about the complexities of caregiving. We are happy to talk about many, but not all of our family experiences in this way, because it's for a purpose in the context of something. Yeah. I remember I had Jameson with me at the grocery once, and I was going through the cereal aisle, and I was getting, I just remember this so well. I was getting a box of Fruit Loops, and somebody that I didn't know whatsoever in the cereal aisle just was just like, oh, what's wrong with your son? Right? And like, this caught me off guard. It greatly irritated me. And my response was, he lives in a society where you as a complete stranger think it's appropriate to ask me that question when I'm getting cereal. And she got so mad, right? Because I was just asking. And again, I would be happy, we are happy to talk with you about some of these complexities of our life, because we know that you care and you're invested and but this is a complete stranger and I'm just trying to buy my damn groceries.
Yeah.
And so
she felt entitled to his life when she had zero in his life, right? But she's entitled to his story when we don't even know her first name.
He was a novelty, right? Yeah. He becomes it reminded me of the way that for so much of our country's history, disabled folks were part of freak shows, circuses, right? He was the spectacle that somebody else could learn from. And we are all for people learning from our family's experiences, but in a way that we're not the spectacle, but that we're valued. And this woman just, clearly didn't value at all. So much depends on the context and how it's asked. I mean, I'm sure the woman, left there thinking that I was just a jerk. But I was tired of that being the kind of expectation that people have. Mm-hmm. And when we tell people, sort of when we do have interactions with folks and we try to tell them the way that their assumptions actually devalue our son, right? They often sort of default to, but my intentions were good, right? Well, I meant well, I didn't mean to. And I would rather somebody insult us not meaning to than insult us on purpose in most ways. But at least if somebody's insulting you on purpose, they own the harm, right? And people then go back to, but I didn't mean to. And it becomes this kind of like protectionist. And if you're not willing to just say, oh yeah, I didn't think about that, and I can see how this would really be part of the problem, I'm sorry, I'll do better. Then if you're not willing to do that on sort of a basic question, then I just don't think you're going to really appreciate the complexity of our lives as part of yours. Mm-hmm. We've only got, right, like the time pressures on us are more than other families. The energy pressures on us are more than on other families. The emotional regulation of all the moving parts is more than on other families. And there's just a point at which like, I don't want it to be a cost benefit analysis, but it becomes like, do we have more margins to keep doing this, or do we just need to get him out of here for his own mental health? And sometimes that's what he needs. And so we're gonna prioritize that rather than the person that is being voyeuristic, again, maybe well-meaning voyeuristic, wanting to know the details of our family lives and why it's weird.
Your community was so strong. I knew you in Idaho, and I knew what a strong community you had there. And so it really surprises me to hear that your community sounds almost like it's non-existent in Michigan where you're living. And community is so important. I know that from all my years of caregiving for Lance. I was his full-time caregiver for 12 years. And had I not had community, I could not have done it. And the two of you have each other, but having community outside of your family is so important. Is there anything else that you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation about community and the things that you have seen and the things that you have dealt with?
I think some of it is, I realize the people that are listening are probably people with children with disabilities or, disabilities themselves. But I'm like, if other people are listening, that to keep asking, to keep trying, to, like, even when, like, people like us are like, no, we can't do this. No, keep trying, keep asking questions, be willing to, like, feel uncomfortable. And when you get an answer that maybe you don't like or makes you feel uncomfortable, like, reflect on that instead of, like, being like, why would they even say something like that? Like, why would they be so mean to me? It's not that we're being mean, it's that we're trying to help you understand, and maybe it doesn't feel good.
I think, at least she is, like, good, fun people to be around. Like, be our friends. And I don't mean that in a needy way. And again, most of your listeners are probably in other parts, but I suspect there's a lot of folks in positions like us. And to be frank, like, it sucks. It gets old. We both feel very, very isolated. And if it just so happens that anybody that knows us listens to this, they're probably going to be like, oh crap, I didn't realize that they felt this way. And it's not that we necessarily think people are bad people, but, like, our lives just complicated in a way that lots of folks don't understand. And it'd be nice to feel like we matter to folks.
And I do know that other people, like, I have, people that we know here, that they also have 3-4 kids, and they're doing a lot too. So I think adding the complexity of our lives and, like, keep trying with us, they're like, losing sleep or have lack of sleep just dealing with typical kids. So I get that. But so because there are people that I've done things with, and I just know that their lives are also complex. And so it's hard for them to be like, let me work harder at being your friend when I still have all of this going on in my life too. So I get that. It's weird because I do have friends that have kids, and I understand why they aren't trying, or not, I shouldn't say trying, but that it's hard for them to, continuously ask us to do stuff because they are going through a lot on their own. But I also have friends that don't have kids or aren't married and stuff like that. And, like, they don't have as good of a reason, I guess. Like, they're busy with other things, but I feel like sometimes that our family is not worth the effort, or they feel that our family is not worth the effort to get to know, in a sense, because I don't know, maybe they have a cost benefit analysis and the cost just is too much for them. I don't know.
I was supposed to have drinks last week with a friend that I work with. We were actually talking about this year. This would have been the first time in 6 months that I've done something social, like me going out with somebody. And I like this person a lot. We're supposed to do it. And they sent me a text. They're like, something came up with my kid. I'm going to have to reschedule. And I just replied back. I was like, if anybody that gets that, it's me. Like, by all means, I'll touch base with you next. So there's a way in which what we've been through has made us so much more sensitive, probably not to everything,
Yeah.
but to a lot, right? And this is just, it was a very different kind of parenting issue than we deal with. But the person knew me well enough that I was going to be honest and forthright when I said, it's not a big deal. I get it. Go and don't feel bad. They knew to trust me on it.
You were also disappointed, and it was discouraging. Again, not at this person. It's just like, oh, I finally have plans. It's so exciting. And then like something falls through, and it's sort of like, okay, I get it. And that's totally understandable. But I mean, it's valid for you to have been sad about it, right?
Yeah, and in part, not because we were going to get together, but in part because this was the first time in 6 months that anything had this, right? So there's a way in which what I was sad because this was so rare, and not because like something about the person. So if that particular person is listening, like, it was right, like, I'm glad that we had made time to do this. I think we're going to try again this week. But it was just one of these ways in which, I mean, your caregiving relationship with Lance is very different than our caregiving relationship with Jameson. But I am so much more attuned now, I think, to the complexities of what that might look like, that I would know better what to say, what to ask, and to take you at your word for stuff in a way that maybe I didn't as much as I should have then.
Sounds like maybe we should get together and write a book, maybe a training for people. Seriously, I'm not joking. Something that might be helpful to other people who are not dealing with disability or illness. Well, I so appreciate your openness and your honesty in sharing all of this, Kevin and Allison. We've got a few more episodes coming up. Our next episode, we will be talking about some more of the challenges that you have faced. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
Right.
Thank you.